us. Yeah, it's us. Testing, I suppose. Can you all hear at the back? Very good. Thank you for those hands. Wah wah, everyone. My name is Isabel Paipadruk Morphy Walsh, and I'm a proud Dunbarung woman from central Victoria. So my land starts at the Great Dividing Range, where we meet the Wurundjeri, goes up just past Benalla, over to the Kinglake region where the 2009 bushfires were, and then back over to the Campaspe on the other side. So I like to think of my land as smack bang in the centre of the world, but I'm a little bit obsessed. So, and I hope we all have a little patch of earth that we feel that way about. So before I get into it, I'd just like to start by acknowledging the traditional owners of the land where we're meeting today. The Wurundjeri people of the Wurrung Nation have lived, loved and looked after this land for thousands and thousands of years, and they will continue to do so for thousands of years. And I feel grateful, particularly in the context of what's going on in the world, to be in this place where we are safe and largely, for me, nurtured. So I have to apologise. Today's event is a little bit different from how it was originally looking on the internet. But our elders are important and integral and part of our community. They suffer and experience the same things that other community members do, and our 3 advertised elders have all had to pull out for various reasons. One's in a lot of back pain, one is very poorly, and one, I've forgotten the third reason, but there was a third reason. So today, stepping in just to provide me with a little bit of, or to provide you guys with a little bit of insight, and so that the show can roll on. We've had the wonderful Julie Jansen and Helen Milroy, Auntie Julie Jansen and Auntie Helen, step up and agree to have a little yarn to us. Before I ask them some questions, because really it's all about them, less about me, just so you know who I am, I'm a weaver, artist, a playwright. You can Google my name and you'll find me out there and about there. But I just wanted to share a little story about 2 of my elders before we began. So a couple of years ago, I was working for Museums Victoria, and I had a pretty big job there. I used to run everything public facing, so all the public programming, all the education programming, all of that kind of stuff. None of the exhibition content, that wasn't my bag. But I got the opportunity to work on an upcoming exhibition. We, at the time, we were redoing the section on the Homeland Wars and the Homeland Violence, aka the Frontier Wars or Frontier Violence. We very specifically changed our language around that because our elders told us to. Wasn't our frontier, they said. We weren't fighting for a frontier, we were fighting for home. So we called them the Homeland Wars or the Homeland Violence. Anyway, I got the opportunity to work on this exhibition a little bit, and I had to develop an education program. And we developed an education program that went all the way from, we had several, ones that went to adults and ones that went to kids. In order to do this, though, I needed to do a deep dive into massacres and the Homeland Violence, and specifically understanding it and then being able to turn it into language that an 11-year-old could digest. And this made me pretty tired, and it made me pretty angry. And I became someone that I didn't quite recognise myself. And one day, we had this big Elders Council meeting, and I came in and I was presenting the education program that I just developed for the adults to Yelenge. And I suppose I was quite harsh in my delivery. I wanted to talk about what had happened to the babies. I wanted to talk about what had happened to certain women, and I wanted to talk about the massacring of lots of men in great detail. And For not the first time in my life, but I hope, and probably not the last time in my life, I actually got pulled up by this group of elders. Two in particular, Uncle Brendan Kennedy and also my father, Uncle Larry Walsh. And they said to me, "Bubby, you've got it all wrong. What you're doing now, it's just not the right way." And I said, "Why? I don't understand. I'm doing exactly what I'm supposed to be doing, which is teaching people about massacres and the homeland wars and violence." And they said, "No, Bubby, anger's in control. And we fight today. We do what we do today for the same reason that the ancestors did and for the same reason that our descendants will do in hundreds of years' time. We fight because we love. We love our people, we love our land, and we love our culture. And this is why we fight. So, Bubby, you need to go back to the drawing board and rewrite this program with love in your heart and at the core." I did. It took me another 6 months, those beautiful elders, but that education programming is still going on at Museums Victoria today. So I just wanted to share that, the power of our elders. Anyway, let me turn to these two beautiful elders that are here today. And that was Uncle Brendan Kennedy and Uncle Larry Walsh. I'm going to make them T-shirts one day that say "Warriors of Love." Anyway, Gumal Al Gyan. Anyway, okay, so Dr. Helen Milroy, I've read in my quick Google search that you were the first Indigenous doctor.
I was.
Yeah, so I was wondering...
I should say, because I'm still here.
Yeah. I was wondering if you could tell us a little bit about your experience breaking into the medical industry.
Well, hello everyone, and it's nice to be asked just to sort of step in.
Yes, I should probably ask you to introduce yourself, Helen. Sorry,
yeah,
my gosh.
I might do that, if that's okay.
Of course.
So it was lovely to receive a few very warm welcomes to country while I've been here during this festival, and obviously just acknowledge the elders past, present and emerging, and thank them for their beautiful custodianship of this lovely country we get to work and play and live in, and I get to raise my grandson back in Perth in Boorloo. So I'm a Pelku woman. My mob are from the Pilbara region up in Western Australia. We're a very small group. We're close to Namil and Injibandi and a few others, and border on with the desert people, the Matu. You wouldn't go there this time of year. It's probably 45 degrees, but in the winter months you see the beautiful purple hues in the landscape, and it's lovely country. But I've been very, very lucky to have grown up on Whadjuk Noongar Budja in Perth, and that really is the most beautiful place in the world to live. So if you're thinking of moving, come to Perth, because it's the best place, I think, to raise children. Professionally, I'm a child psychiatrist, actually the Professor of Child Psychiatry in Perth at the Perth Children's Hospital, and I have a large research team both at the Telephone Kids Institute and the University of Western Australia. Some of you may know Pat Dudgeon, who's a Bardi woman, Indigenous psychologist, and we work together trying to change mental health services to be more culturally appropriate and safe for our mobs and get better outcomes, and also come across to our side of doing things for change instead of us always having to go across to their side. So when I did medicine, people always thought it came from the white side of my family. You can see I'm a bit pale, but it actually wasn't at all, because my nan and her brother and a whole pile of other relatives I had were traditional healers. And I was always reluctant to say that I was the first Aboriginal doctor in Australia, because I wasn't. We've had lots of Aboriginal doctors throughout Australia for many, many thousands of years, and in fact they kept us in really good health over thousands of generations. And if you think about history, and at the time of colonisation, our mob were healthier than most Europeans. Yeah. We had good health, we had fantastic kinship systems, we could nurture our children extremely well, we had great parenting skills, and our mental health was fantastic. We had great well-being, good connections, we understood spirit, land, country connection. In fact, we had an ecological framework in which we lived. So we lived within nature, bounded by those relationships, and everything was about relationship. So you were well because all your relationships were in balance. It wasn't about greed and wealth and power and control. And that's why I think we lived such a peaceful and harmonious life for many thousands of years. I've just written a piece for a journal article recently, and what I said in it was that we're the only people in the world who can say we survived both an ice age and genocide. Yeah. So I reckon we've got some pretty good stuff. So maybe I'll stop there. Oh, just about the medicine thing, that's right. I didn't know I was the first Western trained doctor until some years later, when we got all the Indigenous doctors who had graduated from universities around Australia together for a meeting, and we realised that there was no one who had done medicine prior to me. So I didn't know I was doing it at the time, although there were no black fellas in the course. That was pretty obvious. And to be honest, I was a bit of an exotic during the medical training. I don't think they knew what to do with me. They kept telling me I was different. I didn't know actually what that meant. But at the end of the day, I think different was good because I've been incredibly successful in my career.
Thank you. Annie Julie, would you like to introduce yourself as well?
Sure. I'll begin by acknowledging that I'm on Wurundjeri country and of Wurrung Nation, and it's a great privilege to be here. I love Victoria. My son lives here, my grandchildren live here. I come down to Victoria as often as I can, so it's a beautiful place for me. It's a place when I cross the border from New South Wales, where I live on the south coast, and I suddenly see outside even police stations or hospitals in the towns along that highway have Aboriginal flags, and you don't get that in New South Wales. So this state has something incredibly special, especially now that they're doing truth-telling. So any Victorians here, I congratulate you for living in Victoria, all right? Look, I'll say my welcome in my language, which is the Darug language. I'm a Darug woman of a Burrabarungal clan of the Hawkesbury River, which is north of Sydney. We're the ground zero for invasion. We're the community that is often overlooked and told we don't exist. You know, if you turn up to the Darubbin Land Council run medical service and you say that you're a Darug person, they say you don't exist, we're not putting you here on the books. So, you know, it's often a struggle within Aboriginal communities ourselves to retain your identity. But the Darug mob are strong, and it's produced a number of wonderful writers. So, Jamna Payala Yanawi, I welcome you here. Kwaibidja here to this place in my language, the language that we are trying to revive, and it's great to be invited up here. And I'm sorry the elders didn't make it, but often elders get sick. I know, I've been sick for weeks. So that's what happens, yeah. But I don't know, what else am I supposed to say?
No, that's good.
That's a good start. I'm a novelist, poet and playwright. Thank you for having me. Yeah.
So this event, I was talking to Jane about this event in the lead up to it and its history, and this event actually began as a sort of much smaller or more intimate event called Borrow a Living Book, where people had the opportunity to sit down with elders one-on-one pre-COVID and actually talk to them and yarn with them about their experience. And I suppose one thing I've been thinking a lot about in relation to culture and eldership, often we're presented as though we're stuck in the past in many ways, as though we're not part of a continuous living culture, living being the operative word. And I suppose what I've been thinking about with eldership in particular lately is I've been seeing how my elders are bringing the present and this current context into our culture and into our cultural ways of being, doing, knowing. And so just like this event, really, just like this event has done. So I suppose in that honour of thinking about how the past has influenced the future and can be brought into a current cultural context, I suppose I wanted to ask our elders if there is a story or a moment that you'd like to share from your past that's shaped you today and that shaped you today and your contributions.
Oh, you're pointing to me.
Yeah.
Oh, okay. Okay. The one that springs to mind, I think, and look, I think as I've grown and understood culture more and more, and you know, we know that it's a whole lifelong learning thing. You can't just be culturally secure or safe by doing a 1 hour module online about Aborigines 101. You know, it's a lifelong learning process, and I just love sitting down and listening to our mob talk and hearing the stories and thinking about what it was like for my nan growing up. She was born back in the late 1800s, what it was like for her, what it was like for my mum. In fact, some of you may not know, but I actually went with the Prime Minister over to the Queen's funeral. And my mum's a year younger than the Queen. And I went out of respect for someone's death, but also as a watershed moment in Australian history to think about what it meant for us as a country going forward. And I took my nan with me. Her totem's a crow, so I had a crow pendant that I took with me so she could see the procession with the funeral. And I sat there thinking about my mum and my nan's life, my mum's and the Queen's life, and how different they were. And I thought, my mum's done more for me and for our blackfellas, our group and our mob than the Queen ever did. And yet the Queen had all the power in the world and mum had none. And I think for me it was a real moment of sort of reckoning, of thinking of, well, what am I going to do now with the rest of my career? How am I going to leave a legacy for our mob? And I figured that probably the greatest legacy I could leave was hope for children. And I started writing my books and my stories and doing the illustrations when I was a commissioner with the Royal Commission. It was the Royal Commission into Institutional Responses to Child Sexual Abuse. It was a 5-year Royal Commission, and I spent the whole 5 years out of home in hotels and in other countries, listening to people's incredible stories of survival around the whole country. And I saw heard a lot of Aboriginal people's stories. It was an amazing, profoundly disturbing but incredibly inspiring experience. And it took me to a lot of dark places, and so as part of that I'd have 5 hours in the plane on the way home, so I started writing Bush Mob and started illustrating, and I created a world where I wanted to be, a world where I had some hope and control, and I loved it, and it was funny and stupid. We all love a bit of humour in life, don't we? And I'd be very happy to live with all the animals out bush, because I think that that's what we're connected to, it's what we're most connected to. So as I was writing those stories, I thought to myself, our children just don't get enough of our stuff. They don't get enough of our stories, our way of storytelling, as opposed to other forms of storytelling. And so I was really, I've done a lot of academic writing, but I was really scared to send in a manuscript to a publisher because it was my stuff, it was like my baby. And so I sent it in, and then I've had published books ever since, and I think I'm up to about 14 now. But I think that for me, this moment of thinking about what we have to do going forward, for me, was about saying, I want to make sure our children feel loved. I want them to feel proud. I want them to know who they are, how they can connect. I want them to know they can warble to the magpies and the magpies will warble back. Because at the end of the day, they're always our future.
Beautiful. Oh. She's a wonderful woman. I've only just met her, but I feel like I've known her all my life. She's already introduced me how to do art on an iPad, which I didn't know was possible. She does it with her finger. I mean, I'm like, your finger, not a stylus. She's going, no, it's the finger. Most beautiful books, just absolutely extraordinary. So she's going to give me some for my grandchildren, which is absolutely wonderful. Look, that wonderful thing about what was the moment that kind of... Look, I've got a number of moments in my life which have made me who I am today. I grew up with an Aboriginal father and an English heritage mother. And my dear mother used to say, if I'd known he was Aboriginal, I would never have married him. And I'm like, gee, Mum, that's great. How do you think that makes me feel? But Dad used to take us 3 kids up to the Hawkesbury, to his country, because we lived on the Lane Cove River, right in the middle of Sydney, and we kind of lived on oysters from the river and blue swimmer crabs and fishing. And it's now called Hunters Hill, where we lived, but it was a real bush part of the world in the 1950s. It had a housing commission house there on the edge of the bush. But Dad used to take us up the Hawkesbury, and we'd sleep in a cave on the Hawkesbury. And it was a cave that some men had used during the Depression. Of course, it was a cave which thousands of years of Darug occupation in that cave, and there were handprints down by the river there at Flint and Steel on the Hawkesbury. And he'd make us bed beds out of ferns, like just, you know, we'd all go out and gather the ferns, the three of us. My youngest brother was only about 4, and we'd make a big pile of these on the floor, and he'd put army greatcoats on the top. I guess we must have had something over the top of us, I can't remember. And we'd sleep there. You know, I tell that to people like my husband these days, and they go, "You're making it up." Like, you know, and I said, no, I'm not making this up. And one night in the middle of the night, my younger brother woke up screaming because a great big python came down from the top of the cave and was hanging over his bed, you know, having a really good look at him. He's only 4. And me being the bigger sister, I was 2 years older, I jumped on over and gave him a big cuddle. I said, "What's the matter?" And he's going, "You know, look. And Dad was sitting by the fire. He never seemed to sleep, my dad. He was a fire brigade officer and a stonemason, and he both jobs, and I don't know when he slept, but, you know, he's always seemed to be squatting over a fire or cleaning a fish or something. And Dad looked over at this big python. He said, it's his cave. Don't scare him. You know, he's just having a look to see who's in here." And we're like, "Oh God, you know, how are we going to get back to sleep? You know." But his attitude was, "Look, you know, it's his place. It's just be respectful. You know, he won't bother you. Just go back to sleep. You're lying there, kind of, you know, on your ferns." And you know, experiences like that I had with my dad all the time. Like he would shimmy up a gum tree, and this is in Hunters Hill in Sydney, which is like 2 rack or something nowadays, and he'd shimmy up the gum tree about kind of 20, 30 feet in the air, just with an axe in the back of his shorts, bare feet, and a little bit of rope round his waist, and he'd hack a hole in the side. You know, you see those old photographs of, you know, Victorian and New South Wales men going up the tree, and he'd just be right up the top of the tree to cut out some grubs from the tree, because he always believed in kind of protecting the tree, or to get some wild honey and you know, some native honey, which we called up in the Northern Territory sugar bag. And so just the various experiences I had with my dad in the bush. And he just let us grow wild in the bush every day after school and all the school holidays. So they were the things that made me who I am today. And he was in a situation that if he had identified as an Aboriginal man, he would have lost his job as an officer in the fire brigade. So he used to say, "We just keep that quiet, dear, you know. You just keep that on the quiet." And yet he was, you know, the most he looked like Adam Goodes, big, tall, handsome bloke, all muscles, and very, very proud of him. But if he parked his old Chevy outside the school when I was in high school, I was so ashamed of the, you know, beaten up old bombed car in the 1960s that I'd want him to park round the back of the school. And I wish I could go back in time and say, "Dad, it's all right, I really like those old Chevys." They all ended up in the front garden dying on the front lawn in Boronia Park. Typical blackfella's house, really. Anyway.
So considering, I don't know if the two of you feel this way, or if it's my youth, but I often feel like I get so rarely to actually publicly tell people what it is that I'm thinking and what it is that is important to me and matters at this moment in time in the world. And so I was wondering, with no limitations, if there's something that maybe is important to you that you want to talk about at this moment in this context, considering what's going on in the world. Maybe there isn't, I don't know.
Do you want to go first?
No.
I also chair a group called Gay Dewey Proud Street Australia, and it's an Indigenous mental health advocacy group in the Commonwealth. And we were really, really worried as a group looking at social emotional wellbeing. We run social emotional wellbeing gatherings and various other mental health things. We were really worried about the referendum, like really, really worried about the impact that it was going to have and the aftermath. And, we're all feeling the aftermath, aren't we? Yeah. And I have to honestly say, I got to the end of last year and just fell over. I was worn out. I think everyone was. I didn't speak to anyone who didn't end last year just feeling terrible. And I wrote some things about staying calm in the storm, you know, seeking our ways of knowing, being and doing. Our ways of knowing is to seek wisdom, to be courageous. Our ways of being are about, you know, that interconnection that we have, looking after our families. Our ways of doing are about caring and compassion and kindness. So I wrote some pieces about that just to sort of help people to kind of navigate our way through with a way of knowing that we can get through this. and the fact that we've had a storm raging around us for hundreds of years since colonisation, but we've always managed to get through, and our ancestors faced much worse. But we're still feeling the aftermath, and I just don't know where we're going. I just don't know when that impact is going to end, because we're still going backwards. I think we've gone back 50 years in relationships, and we're still going backwards. And I worry about the welfare of our children and our young people in that space. Our young people that we saw at the uni were really angry, very distressed, and our old people had an existential despair. It's not a good place for a whole community to be in. So what I would like to say is we do need time to grieve. We do need time to understand the impact that it's had on us, and that we can't just turn around immediately and say, well, we're ready for the next fight. So I'd say give yourself some time and have a little bit of space. Our allies can continue on, but they also need a bit of time to understand the impact that this had on them as well. I think we're going to be forging a new way ahead, and it's going to be different from what I've done in the last 30 years. I felt really conciliatory before, and I've always worked across both systems. I don't feel so conciliatory anymore.
It's just on that. I can't give you the attribute the original owner of this idea, because I can't remember. But at some point in my discussions about The Voice, someone, and I know that they're black because they wouldn't have come up with this metaphor otherwise, but I honestly can't remember who, said to me, Narciss, it's kind of like a cool burn. The fires run over the top, and to the untrained eye, it looks like there's nothing there, nothing left. But for those of us who know, underneath the ground, you know, the new seeds are beginning to do their work. But we humans, we're a little bit more complex than the plants, or at least we like to think so. So we're going to take a little bit more time than the 6 to 8 weeks the grass takes.
And look, I don't want to end on a negative. I actually think that we are strong. We are strong peoples. We have strong culture. We have fantastic kids coming forward. I mean, I've got a grandson who's just amazing, you know, and I love him to pieces, and I know he's going to do well. But I think we need a different way of going forward, and I haven't quite worked that out yet. But we'll get there.
I think posing the question is really, I think posing the question is really valuable, Aunt. Like, just bringing that up for people to think on it and problem solve together is really valuable in itself. Yeah. Sorry, Aunt.
No, not at all. I think coming to Black and Bright has been fantastic, and the crew here who are behind that, and the whole organisation, it's been really inspiring for me. It's the first time I've been, and the amount of young Indigenous people, like I met last night or I'm meeting, with these bright faces and really well educated and really passionate about writing and education. Now, when I taught at Sydney Uni, I started teaching there in 1980 at the Curry Centre, and most of the students were women older than me, and I was in my 30s and they were in the 40s and 50s, who'd been absolutely denied education, and they were desperate to kind of to catch hold of their opportunity to be at that stage just to train as Aboriginal education assistants, but they'd go to Sydney Uni and they were in the classes with me. And now we see the shift of new generations coming through of people who've been able to have an education, and heavens above, haven't Indigenous people in this country thrived if given the opportunity, or taken the opportunity, not given it, hard fought for. But I want to say something else, something a bit more kind of international about kind of what I'm thinking about where we are now. I'll just tell you a brief anecdote. I was invited to the Bad Sydney Crime Festival, because apparently it's, bad Sydney, well, anyway, because I'm apparently one of the few Indigenous writers writing a crime novel, and I do advise some young writers coming up, try that genre. It's a crack, it's really good fun to write, and it can do quite well. Anyway, and I was sitting on a panel, and one of the people on the panel was Michael Muhammad Ahmad. You may know of his work. Beautiful work. He works in Western Sydney. He invites all young writers to come in what's called the sweatshop, and works with young writers of all different backgrounds, but a lot of Islander people, Indigenous people, people of Arabic background come to his workshops. And he came in late to the panel, and he was really, really upset. It was about when the whole Gaza explosion was happening, and the Palestinian people were suffering so badly, as, of course, have the Israelis as well, And he came in, he was kind of shaking, and he had the microphone. He had to answer some question about, oh, what places inspire you as a crime writer? And he just burst out about Gaza and Lebanon and how his family was in Syria, and it was this impassioned plea to everybody to look at what was happening internationally. And then it was next person's turn to talk, and I won't name names because I never do that, but it was a crime writer who said, now my life in New York, and I'm sitting at the end going, what? And then someone else, you know, and I write about the desert or something. And then it was my turn. I grabbed the microphone and I turned around, I leant across the other people and I shouted out, Mohammed, we hear you. Yeah. We hear you. Yeah. And I said, you are in a safe place here. I said, Indigenous people know what it's like to be massacred. We feel for you. This is a terrible situation, but I also would say it's a terrible situation for Israelis as well. It's very, very hard to take sides. But to actually respond at that moment to a real thing that was happening and be able to identify from any people on earth that have suffered those kind of terrible cataclysms. And I think, you know, I guess it's because I grew up in a family where my dad joined the Communist Party when he came back from the war. And in those days, my mother said, oh, we loved going to the Communist Party parties because I could wear nice frocks. So, but my dad, every night, he'd sit there at the table with us kids and he'd have his bottle of beer, his cup of tea, his bread and butter, his 2 chops and 3 veg, and he would sit there and force us to argue politics and talk about the Tribune magazine or, God knows, the Soviet Union magazine, you know, before they invaded Hungary and he pulled out of the Communist Party. But you know, just the fact of the politics of our life is an Aboriginal way of looking at the world. And I think that there's a solidarity there with any nation on the world who suffers the indignity of genocide. Yeah.
Yes.
Very powerful, Aunt. Very powerful. Very powerful. So I suppose both of you have worked with young ones and spoken about the need to bring young ones up and help them rise in their power. And I suppose you two sit in the role within the community as elders at this point in time. So what, you know, I often am hearing a lot at the moment, and I think my generation are hearing that it's time for us to step up. It's time for us to begin and to do. And many of us are, like, don't get me wrong, there are many in my generation that are active already. But I suppose if there was anything that you could, you know, advise a young one about what you think needs to happen in the world and how they need to move to get there.
Okay, well, with my mental health hat on, I'll take a developmental perspective. I think we need to empower our little ones, you know, right from early on, not just youth. I think youth gets paid a lot of attention. No offence for that, because that's a good thing. I mean, our youth are needy and they have a lot of distress and they need a lot of help. But we often forget that they didn't arrive as teenagers or as young people without having had adversity earlier in life. So I think that we need to actually empower our little ones right from the beginning. And if we look at our traditional ways of parenting, then what we actually did was we allowed for a lot of experiential learning. We allowed our kids to have early autonomy. There was a lot of storytelling, which is about instilling insight and the child to be able to understand how they make decisions for themselves. And so it was about insight and understanding rather than a lot of instructional learning, which is a non-Indigenous way of parenting. So I think we need to follow those old ways and make sure that we have that empowerment at every level across the line. I mean, when you think, you know, when you see a news item and there's an 8-year-old who's driven a car down a freeway, you know it's going to be an Aboriginal kid because they do grow up with that early autonomy. You know, they can get on and do things for themselves. And I think that's fantastic because that's actually what built our resilience, and it gave us that gumption to just get up and do things and to go forward and be able to do things. So I think we've got to make sure that we don't get swayed by all these parenting programs that are foisted upon us from others, and we actually make sure that we bring up our own stuff that we know was so good and continue to do that and be proud of that, so that our kids and our young people grow up in that model that, yes, they are their own decision makers. However, they are buffered by a collective of aunties and uncles and mums and dads and grandparents and elders around them to make sure that they are buffered throughout their life's experiences. I would also say that the call isn't just for young people to stand up and get on with it. It's also for all of us adults to make sure that we're supporting our young people in the right way. It's not fair to expect our youth to take on the burdens that we should be taking on as adults because there's not enough of us to go around. We still have to make sure that we're supporting you as best we can. And I think it's great when, with some of the research that I do, you know, we always have, we have different sort of advisory groups within the research, and we do a lot of co-design, and we really listen to young people when they want to tell us what it is that, you know, they want us to do or they want us to look at, or the way they speak about it. And so we let them do that. We listen to them. We sit down and we have a yarn and we listen to them. And sometimes they give us an insight that we wouldn't otherwise have. And it's hard as adults, I think, to remember what it was like when you were 6 or 7, but we had a lot of magical thinking, hope, awe, wonder that we lose a little bit along the way. And so actually going back and hearing kids from all different sort of age groups be able to tell you what they think is just awesome. And I think that helps us to then do things better in the future, actually hearing what's required. Also then fitting that with what we also know is going to help and work and our own experiences. But it's like a joining as opposed to a hierarchical power balance.
I could listen to Helen for all day.
Both of you. Both of you.
It stirs me to think, when I was a very young teacher, I went to work in a very remote community, now called Minyeri. Then it was called Hodgson Downs Cattle Station, owned by a Hong Kong consortium. And it was Alawa people, and it's about 300 kilometres towards the Gulf country, south east of Katherine Town in the Northern Territory. And one of the ways that I was a first-year out teacher, I trained in drama for high schools, and I'm in a school with 52 kids in one caravan from the ages of 4 through to 18, and nobody could read or write. And I'm like, oh, this is going to be a bit of a challenge. And the only way I really knew how to teach was through art and drama. So, and there's no phone, there's no internet. You know, I had a cassette player with 2 cassettes that the Baptist preacher had left there. My son ended up at night going, Mavival says, and I said, who the hell's Mavival? I worked out it was the Bible. So. Anyway, to get to the point, so I didn't really know how to teach anything to little kids, so, you know, we divided the class into 2. I brought a young man with me, a husband. He married me after about 2 months when he heard I was going to the Northern Territory, and they wouldn't let him go unless we were married. So we went down to the registry office and got married and came back. He took the older kids and I took the younger kids. And we divide the classroom, one caravan, but those big caravan schools, they're demountables, into a theatre project. Like we'd say, oh, we're going to Katherine, and none of these kids had ever been to Katherine Town because the only vehicle the whole community of 400 Alawa traditional people had was a tractor, and it's going to take you about 3 weeks to get to Katherine in that tractor. So we'd turn all the school into shops in town, and some kids would be the shopkeepers, and we gave them money from the Monopoly box so they could learn how to count. And I would teach them, they spoke English, but it's Roper Creole English, and I'd teach them how to go into the shop and say, you know, I'd like, you know, 3 ice creams, please, thank you very much, and, you know, teaching good manners, etc. And we'd play all day in Katherine Town in the shops in the school, right? And the kids absolutely loved it, and they took on all roles. And another time we took a plane to Sydney, you know, and they're all in the plane in their belts in the classroom, and they absolutely loved it. But it was really interesting because those children they'd seen a few movies, a few Western movies that the cattle station manager used to put up on a big sheet sometimes at night. That's when he wasn't flogging the kids with a stock whip, you know, hello, white Australia. And one night he bought the film Midnight Cowboy. He's a bit surprised, I think, what was in that. Anyway, he's ever seen Midnight Cowboy. It wasn't a cowboy film after all. Anyway, what was I saying? Yeah, anyway, so we learnt by doing, and we'd go out to the Billabong every afternoon. That was called sport. Because, you know, it's like 40 degrees every day, so you go down to the Billabong. Sport is lying in the Billabong, eating strands of beautiful blue lily strands like celery, and dancing with the kids in the water and in the mud. And that was sport every single afternoon. But the notion of taking children outside, getting them off screens, getting them away from phones is really, really important. To take them into the bush. and us as Aboriginal educators or parents or non-Aboriginal parents as allowing the children to experience the Australian bush and not be scared of it, because the bush puts its arms around you and looks after you. And it's a place I know lots of foods and medicines and how to make somewhere to sleep overnight. And I think that taking children back to country, no matter who they are, and even if you're just taking them for a walk in the national park and stripping your clothes off and getting underneath a waterfall, it's that ability to embrace the natural environment, which will make really strong, resilient adults.
Beautiful. So we have time if anyone has a burning question from the audience, maybe one or two. Yes, over here.
I acknowledge the Wurundjeri, who are the traditional owners of this land. My name is Davina Woods. I'm a Guugiyu woman, speaker of Guugiyu Lungi, and in our Aboriginal English, I'm a Murri who's lived here since 1990. I'm sorry I wasn't here in time to get everyone's names. The woman in the middle, when I was a young woman in Brisbane hanging out with the elders at Opal, which was really a very conservative organisation, but we had beautiful women there like Rita Huggins, Jackie's mum. And she was the woman who said to me, to be Aboriginal means to be political. You hit on that one. Sis, don't talk about us as stereotypes, because our bloody broken down cars were in the back paddock, not the front yard.
Point taken. Thanks for that. We were proud of ours.
We found a lizard living in one of our cars out the front. A bobtail goanna it was.
And I just wanted to add to the, yes, we can have empathy for other people in the world who are suffering, and I have taken a side, and I apologise to the Jewish people in the room, but I'm actually barracking for the Gazans, because they're the ones who were pushed off their land. And if you've ever looked at English history, it was the bloody Poms that got in there and divided up things as the way they are now as well. So yes, be political. It's part of your blackness. But think about your own backyard first. And yes, every bloody one of us is mourning what happened with the referendum. Those of us who are on the left side of politics are sad that it was defeated, not because we wanted it to get up, but because we actually wanted everyone to see that we want more, we deserve more. And getting that thing up for me, because I voted with the right side, is to actually get that next step forward. But those idiots on the far right, and you know who I'm talking about, that stupid bimbo from bloody Northern Territory, where her traditional community doesn't even acknowledge her, are so internally colonised that she couldn't even say, oh yeah, colonialism has impacted on us. Well, let me tell you, all of you white fellas here who don't already know my story, my grandfather was orphaned at the end of a massacre in 1881, taken to the closest colonial town where he was taken by Irish Catholics who he slaved for 30 years, only being released when the old person died. And you think I've got nothing to be bitter about and nothing to say? Then you're wrong.
Thank you for sharing that story. I think there are so many of those stories that are like that we still hold, and they're still impacting on us, and they will forever.
Yeah. Thank you, Aunt.
Do either of you have any parting words before I... No, you don't have to. It's okay.
We could
I
stay
have
here
some.
all day. We've got plenty of stories, haven't we, Helen?
I guess I would say the thing that I just really love, there's lots of things I love about our culture, but I just love that we can come together and have a yarn about really serious things and then have a good laugh. Yeah. You know, I think that's one of our strongest resilient factors, and I love that. And I love that like I've just met this lady a couple of days ago, and we're just besties now. And that's what I think I like about the recognition of Aboriginal people as to who we are. We can come from different mobs, but we share so much within us that it's just beautiful, and I think we should never forget that. We can never really truly be divided because we have a spirit that's collective.
Not sure what else to say. Look, wonderful privilege to be invited here. I keep forgetting I'm an elder, and people say the elders are coming, and I'm always going, you know. And they're like, no, that's you, Aunt. And I'm like, oh, okay. And people keep asking me, do I want a cup of tea? And at first I said, oh, don't be ridiculous, I can get my own tea now. I go, yes, I will. I'll have milk in that, thanks. And so it's hard to believe it's
I can't help but
old, but I quite like it, actually.
I can't help but interrupt. My mum keeps saying, when I tell her my age, she goes, how'd you get that old? She's 96 and she just doesn't think she's that old.
Yeah, we always feel younger in here. As my character in my novel Maduka the River Serpent said, who's a 50-something Murray woman from the Darling River, she says, I might be, 60 up here, but I'm 16 down there. Very naughty. You've got to... just one last word about the referendum is that we fought really hard in our town on Yuin country, and the Brinja Walbunga people who we work with fought really hard. Uncle Bunja Smith, he talked to 20 different groups. He had to bring his own mob along to vote yes. But then he would also bring the non-Aboriginal people along to vote. And he fought so hard. And after the disappointing result, we had our town full of great big banners. Vote yes, even over the local pub. And the publican said, don't tell anybody I said it was all right to put it up there, will you? And we said, no, mate, we won't tell anybody. And when the result came in and we were all so devastated, I rang him up the next day. I said, Uncle Bunja, how do you feel? And he said, you think we haven't been knocked down before? We just get up again, girl. To the next hill, he said. And I thought my English grandfather, who was on the Somme in France for 3 years, fighting with the British Fusiliers, he would say, to the next hill. And so, all of us, to the next hill. Yeah.
So please join me in thanking our two wonderful elders, Auntie Julie Jansen and Auntie Helen Milroy. Oh no. Well, I was going to say I've been requested by an aunt that every time I speak to a group of people, I sing at least one line in language. So, in honour of the fact that there's this whole thing, Kulin Nation Song Women, you can go and Google us, we're a thing. Mandy Nicholson and I and a few other Kulin Nation women got together and we co-wrote a song. And so this particular line that I'm going to share from the song is the same in both Wurundjeri and in Taungurung. So sort of in honour and in callback to the Wurundjeri, I'll do that line from the song. And I'm just going to tell you to embrace Kulin country and embrace Kulin people. Beautiful, strong Kulin people country. Mandanai Kulin Bik, burned up Kulin. Mandanai Kulin Bak, burned up Kulin. Thank you.